I'm Dom Nicholls, and this is Ukraine the Latest. Today, as Russia is held responsible for the Azeri plane crash in Kazakhstan and for the latest attack on undersea infrastructure in the Baltic Sea, we hear about the Victoria Amelina Fellowship, open to writers both inside Ukraine and abroad.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
The first duty of my government is security and defence, to make clear our unshakable support of NATO and with our allies towards Ukraine.
Keep stand strong. Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Monday, the 30th of December, 2 years and 316 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today, I'm joined by writer and curator Dr. Sasha Dovzhyk, a director of Index Ukraine, a culture and research institution. I'll start with a few of the military and political updates, of which there's been quite a few. So firstly, thanks to Venetia for covering on Friday. That was very good of her. She spoke at the time of the plane crash in Kazakhstan, and there was speculation about what it was and what it might have been and so on and so forth. I mean, crikey, don't things move fast? We've got more on that, obviously, over the weekend. I was last on the pod last Monday, and since then, and for legal niceties, I should correctly say these are so far only allegations. Russia is thought to be responsible for another attack on undersea infrastructure and for shooting down the Azeri plane that crashed in Kazakhstan after reportedly being hit by a Pantsir surface-to-air missile on approach to Grozny airport and being denied permission to land. There were also suggestions of technical interference that made the control of that aircraft worse. 38 people killed. So just on that one, so the plane, it was flying, as you remember, flying from Azerbaijan's capital of Baku to Grozny in Chechnya. Russia's response to accusations of having brought the plane down, like their normal response to any accusations of bad behaviour, which is deny, deflect and discredit. So deny the story outright, deflect, which is normally whataboutery, NATO, Nazis, Iraq, something like that. And then discredit the journalist or discredit the source of the report. So their first response to the Azeri plane crash was to deny. They said it was a bird strike. They said it was a gas cylinder explosion on board. They said it was bad weather. And then it was to deflect. They said it was Ukrainian drone attacks nearby that made them fire on the plane. Putin eventually apologised over the weekend, but without saying Russia was to blame, which, as any 4-year-old knows, is exactly how apologies work. Now, the Azeri president was having none of it. In a statement put out shortly after the crash, this is a few days ago, Azerbaijan authorities said President Ilham Aliyev emphasised that the Azerbaijan Airlines passenger plane encountered external physical and technical interference while in Russian airspace, resulting in a complete loss of control. The head of state highlighted that the multiple holes in the aircraft's fuselage, injuries sustained by passengers and crew due to foreign particles penetrating the cabin mid-flight, and testimonies from surviving flight attendants and passengers confirm evidence of external physical and technical interference. So they were very quick in coming out and having none of this truck about bird strikes and what have you. But then there was a TV interview yesterday where President Aliyev said Russia must admit responsibility for the crash. Obviously, this comes after Putin's apology. President Aliyev accused Russia of attempting to hush up the incident. Now, in this interview with the state-run Azerbaijan television, he said, "We can say with complete clarity that the plane was shot down by Russia. We are not saying that it was done intentionally, but it was done. The facts are that the Azerbaijani civilian aircraft was damaged from the outside over Russian territory near the city of Grozny and practically lost control. We also know that our aircraft was rendered uncontrollable by electronic warfare." End of quote. So they are now ramping it up. I note that line there about they're not saying it was done intentionally, but they are very, very obviously holding Russia responsible for this. Baku has delivered a list of demands to Moscow, including an apology, an admission of responsibility, holding the perpetrators criminally responsible, and paying compensation to the Azerbaijani state and the affected passengers and crew members. So President Aliyev yesterday said, "These are our conditions. The first of them was already fulfilled yesterday." That's the apology bit. "I hope that our other conditions will be accepted as well." So very interesting there, I thought, how quickly and how strongly Azerbaijan have come out to refute the first sort of bird strike bad weather type nonsense. And of course goes against as we've talked many times on this pod over the last few years, Azerbaijan's relationship with Russia is tested. The position in the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, is challenged. So what this does to their relationship longer term will be interesting to watch. Okay, so that was the plane. Then through the haze of eggnog, you may remember that on Christmas Day, the S-Link 2 power line that connects Estonia and Finland and which runs along the bottom of the Baltic Sea was cut, seemingly by a dragged anchor from the Eagle S tanker, part of Russia's Shadow Fleet. Again, I was quite impressed here. Finland acted very quickly. It boarded and has effectively impounded the ship to allow investigations. It appears that the ship, like any oil tanker would obviously, has sensitive surveillance equipment on board. So 2 very large incidents in the week since I've been away. I will give my opinion on, or more opinions, at the end of today's episode. Anyway, into Ukraine. And last night, 21 drones out of 43 were shot down over the Kharkiv, Poltava, Chernihiv, Odessa, Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk regions, Ukraine's Air Force said this morning. The others were lost. The other 22 were lost, which we've taken and been brought down by electronic warfare or sent back via Belarus and Russia. Now, debris damaged residential houses in Kharkiv and Odessa oblasts, but there are no casualty reports that I've seen so far this morning from there. However, yesterday, President Zelensky said Russia had escalated its aerial assault on Ukraine, launching more than 280 guided bombs, the glide bombs, the cab glide bombs, and nearly 370 attack drones and over 80 missiles in the past week alone. Writing on Telegram, he said, "Our cities and communities are under constant Russian attacks. Even on Christmas night, Russia organised a massive air attack." And I know Venetia spoke about that on Friday. Now, on the ground over the weekend, tiny adjustments in Kursk. I mention them only because there have been movements. It would be wrong for me to say nothing's happened, but very, very small adjustments, both sides losing and gaining a bit of ground. Very little change elsewhere. Sometimes it does take being away for a few days just to see how little is changing. Last week I was cautioning about the southern Donbass town of Velika Novosilka. Well, I am still cautioning. It is still standing. It's still in a precarious situation. Russian forces not surrounding it, but from the southwest through the east to the northeast, but essentially no real change on the ground there. Similarly, in the vicinity of Pokrovsk, a bit further to the northeast in the Donbass, Russia has moved a little to the west, but no changes to the positions in the Kherson area, Russian positions down in the southwest, where Russia's I'm not entirely sure what they attempted to do. Tried to get across the river, we think, tried to do something against Kherson city and oblast, we think, but we're not actually sure, and nothing much has changed, no sides, no movement down there either. Now, elsewhere, Russian authorities announced on Saturday that anti-COVID restrictions in St. Petersburg are to be extended until the end of 2025. Now, the political analyst Alexander Dovzhyk said that if you're wondering why Russia is still battling COVID, the answer is it's not. He says the anti-COVID restrictions allow regional authorities to lawfully ban protests in urban centres. Okay, next one. Britain has announced a new £4.5 million funding package to help Ukraine's efforts to document, investigate and prosecute Russian war crimes. So my friend and colleague George Allison at the UK Defence Journal says that this funding is intended to support Ukraine's war crimes investigation and aligns with the UK's continued efforts alongside the US and EU through the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group. Britain's Defence Secretary John Healey, speaking about the UK's role, said, "Throughout 2024, the fierce courage of the Ukrainian people has continued to inspire the world. As we enter 2025, the UK's resolve to reinforce support for Ukraine is unwavering." Now, the funding will assist in prosecuting perpetrators of war crimes by enhancing the Ukraine legal system and its ability to gather evidence and build comprehensive cases, particularly related to conflict-related sexual violence. Britain's Foreign Secretary David Lammy said there can be no lasting peace without accountability, and UK support will help Ukraine as it pursues justice for the victims and survivors of these crimes. Now, continuing the theme of support packages, the US has announced this morning a new package of almost $2.5 billion, big B billion, Just under half will come from the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. That's sort of training and other stuff. It's not just military hardware. President Biden said, at my direction, the United States will continue to work relentlessly to strengthen Ukraine's position in this war over the remainder of my time in office. Nice one, Joe. Okay, next one. The Rating Group, in association with Gallup and the Gallup International End-of-Year Survey, taking a snapshot of Ukrainian public opinion, says 45% of Ukrainians expect that next year will be better than 2024. 27% think worse, 20% the same, 8% undecided. Now, that is more pessimistic than last year. Last year, 51% had positive expectations, so 6% more. And 17% had negative. That's up a bit from 10% last year. However, those figures, if you look at the data, and of course there's lies, damn lies and statistics, look at the data, those figures are very, very broadly similar to the US. So this Gallup poll is international, 35 countries. So those figures are markedly similar to the US. However, the vast majority of respondents from Ukraine expect economic difficulties next year. 63% expect the situation for the economy to get worse. That's gone up from 52%. And only 13% expect it to get better. That's down slightly from 17%. 20% no change, down from 29% last year. Again, could be slightly gloomy, but those figures are almost identical to Germany's in the survey. So I'd look at these surveys, I read them, and Gallup is a respected organisation to be doing this, the Rating Group also. But I do look at the data and think, well, okay, so is it a hill of beans? And if so, how big's the hill and how many beans? I'm going to stop that metaphor. So if you are similar to the US and Germany in terms of your expectations for the next year and the economy, that's not altogether a bad place to be. Just so you know where I'm coming from, this Gallup International End-of-Year Survey, it's been going on since 1977. It was conducted in 35 countries with just over 35,000 people interviewed. And in each country, a sample of 1,000 people were asked between October and December this year. And in Ukraine, the Rating Group ran it. So 1,000 people across the country. They're not massive, but that's what these surveys are. Okay, a couple more from me. On Friday, the US delivered its first LNG, liquefied natural gas shipment to Ukraine. Ukraine's largest private energy company, Dovzhyk, said that the delivery consists of approximately 100 million cubic meters of gas and represent Kyiv's first direct LNG purchase from the US. This reporting is from the ISW, the Institute for the Study of War. Now, the US LNG shipment is part of a broader 20-year agreement between Dovzhyk and the US company Venture Global to supply Ukraine with US liquefied natural gas. We've mentioned this deal before, but now it's actually starting to arrive. I mean, if you want to see another example of why starting this war was a monumental mistake for Putin, just note how Russia's oil and gas supply to Europe has gone down. But look at the eastern seaboard of the United States and look at the boom time there for LNG export terminals. However, some LNG still does come from Russia, and oil and gas does come from Russia. And yesterday, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha, who I know is in Damascus today, actually, meeting the leader of the Syrian administration, Ahmed probably raising the issue of Russia's naval and air bases. But anyway, so Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha said imports of Russian LNG to the European Union must be banned and replaced with supplies from the United States and other partners, Qatar, Australia. But I think the US has got the transport cost between the US is much lower than Qatar and Australia. So there's in the pound seats there and the dollar seats. Now, according to a recent report in the Financial Times, as of mid-December this year, the EU imported 16.5 million tonnes of Russian LNG. That surpassed last year's total of just over 15.1 million tonnes. Now, for comparison, and the calculations are tricky because it's all about whether you measure the gas in its liquid form when it's being transported or in its gaseous state once converted back. But I took my socks off, did some calculations. I think the 100 million cubic meters delivered on Friday equates to about 100,000 tonnes of LNG. So they've got some way to go to replace the 16 or nearly 16.5 million tonnes from Russia. But it's a start and it's likely only going one way. If I've got those maths wrong, if anyone in the LNG industry, please correct me. 100 million cubic meters of gas delivered to Ukraine on Friday. I think that equates to about 100,000 tonnes. But please advise if I've got that wrong. Okay, a couple more. The ISW, again, Institute for the Study of War, are saying today that Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov explicitly rejected two suggestions reportedly being considered by Donald Trump's team last month as conditions for ending the war. These conditions were the delay of Ukraine's membership of NATO for 20 years and the deployment of European peacekeepers in Ukraine. So those were two things that were being mooted or part of the discussion. We've mentioned them here before. And Sergei Lavrov said not interested. He was giving an interview to the pro-Kremlin media site TASS. They published this yesterday. Lavrov said Russia is not satisfied with the Trump team's reported proposals. You may remember Putin made similar comments on Boxing Day, December the 26th. Now, as is the Russian way with so-called negotiations, which is demand the maximum, play the victim, and then make no concessions whatsoever, Lavrov went back to basics and said any agreements to end the war must eliminate the root causes of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which I thought was all about Nazis and drug dealers. But for accuracy and to help us out, because they do shift a bit, he said the root causes were NATO's alleged violation of obligations to not advance eastward and, quote, the aggressive absorption, unquote, of areas near Russia's borders. Again, playing this line that NATO is an entity, a sovereign actor, capable of such action, and that these independent sovereign states are not choosing to join an alliance against this murderous, fanatical bully. They've got no agency whatsoever. Anyway, he's also saying, Lavrov is also saying that the Ukrainian government were discriminating against ethnic Russians, Russian language, media, culture, blah, 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 blah. Right, fine. And then finally for me here, we just do need to note what's happening in Georgia. Salom Zurabishvili announced her departure from the Georgian presidential palace yesterday. The Georgian government has inaugurated Georgian Dream, that's the pro-Russian party in power, Georgian Dream's presidential candidate Mikhail Kevalashvili as the new president. However, Ms. Zurabishvili said she still considers herself to be the legitimate president. Georgians have continued their protests against Kevalashvili's inauguration in the capital, Tbilisi, and there have been a number of arrests and violence. You'll find it on social media, on online police and protesters. It was notable, though, that for the first time there was no military parade during the presidential inauguration or military activity in public, which perhaps suggests the military would not be happy so openly opposing the will of the people, or perhaps becoming embroiled in any confrontations. So we do keep our eye on Georgia. Okay, that's enough for me. I'm delighted now to welcome back to the pod our friend Dr. Sasha Dovzhyk, Director of Index Ukraine, a cultural and research institution based in Lviv. As I say, Sasha's a writer, a broadcaster, and you'll find her details in the episode notes. You'll find her online. Sasha, you've been on the pod before. Welcome back. I'd like to talk about Victoria Amelina, your friend, our friend, in a moment, and her book that you've helped assemble, and also the fellowship that you're going to be running in her name. But first of all, you're not in Ukraine now, but you've just come out of the country for a Christmas New Year break. Can you just tell us a little bit about what the mood of the country was like, where you were, and when you left a few days ago? Welcome back, Sasha.
Thank you so much, Dom. It's a great pleasure to speak to you, and it's a great pleasure to be back on the pod. I just can't but say that it's incredibly sad that David is not here to moderate the conversation. His loss is deeply felt in Ukraine and across the community of Ukraine supporters, but you guys are doing great to preserve his legacy and keep going in his name, and thank you so much for doing it. So yes, I'm currently in Central Europe for a few days to see my parents, but I was in Ukraine just 2 days ago. And in Kyiv, I was in the aftermath of one of the big missile strikes on the city center. And it's been the one in which the Cathedral of St. Nicholas in the very center of Kyiv was damaged in a missile attack. And as always, it feels very specific when a landmark to which your memories are connected, which teaches you to fall in love with your capital, with your culture, with your country, with its diversity, is damaged in such a barbaric way. So the mood was quite subdued. But nevertheless, people keep going as always. I keep waking up to the air raid alerts, but I don't shelter anymore because currently the danger of ending up under a car because I'm underslept is higher than or I prefer to consider it's higher than a danger of being hit by an Iranian or Russian drone at night. So we keep going, and basically it's the community of my friends and cultural producers and defenders in Ukraine who always inspire me with great hope and who just will never let us give up. It's writers who volunteer in Hospitalier Battalion, for example, is my friend, writer, academic Katerina Zarembo, who sort of alternates between serving at the front line and saving Ukrainian soldiers and going back to Kyiv, where she is parenting her children, but also producing brilliant work. And it's people like my friends from my childhood from Zaporizhia, with whom we keep texting like every day and who keep fighting on the front lines for 3 years already. And they have all received injuries in this fight, and they have all recuperated, and they have all gone back to defend their country. And basically, it's in their honor and to support their fight that we must keep going. So this is basically the mood. I wouldn't say it's very optimistic. It's quite subdued, but also it's very resolved as it's been 4 years now. I was just in a museum in Warsaw dedicated to the history of European Jews. And as always, when I see footage from the Second World War, I'm struck with this thought, how the heck did people endure such bloodshed and such cruelty for 6 years? And then I realized that now in Ukraine, we are entering the 4th year of an all-out genocidal war that we resist with everything we can. So here we go. We don't need museums to tell us how to endure this. We are actually the ones enduring.
Thanks, Sasha, and thanks for your words about David. Now then, you were much closer to Victoria Amelina, than we met her a couple of times here on the pod. Spoke to her more often, but you were much closer to her. You've been working on a book that she had been working on prior to her death in 2023 in Kramatorsk after that Russian missile strike on the cafe. Can you tell us about the book, what it's going to be, your involvement with it, and when we can get our hands on it, what Victoria wanted to achieve with this work?
Yes, it's a great honor again to speak about this book. It's called Looking at Women, Looking at War, a War and Justice Diary. And as you say, it was left unfinished at the time when Victoria was killed in a Russian missile attack on Kramatorsk in the summer of 2023. It's a beautiful book which combines reportage and memoir and essayistic prose about the power of Ukrainian culture and the various warnings about the dangers of Russian colonialism. It's absolutely marvelous, and it's filled with Victoria's irony. And although it was left unfinished, Victoria did most of the job. She managed to almost complete it. What was left for the editorial group to do is to try to delineate parts of the book that were left unfinished, which she could not complete. We never intended to fill them with our own words, but rather to give a little context. But mostly it's Victoria's voice, resilient and brave and courageous, that permeates these pages. In this book, she writes about her own journey, and this writing draws an arc of a hero of our time, a writer who during the full-scale invasion becomes a war crimes investigator, and she documents Russian atrocities all over Ukraine, in the process realizing that actually her power as a storyteller is also quite handy to deliver these truths to the outside audience. And she goes back to writing, and she starts and she continues writing this wonderful book. And I think that it is this arc that makes it very compelling and distinguishes the book. It will be published mid-February, and we will definitely invite listeners of the pod to the presentation, which will take place in London. So keep your heads up. If I can say a few more words about the contents of the book, I would probably stress that it can open for the reader some yet unseen pages of Ukrainian history and of Ukrainian culture and of Ukrainian art. For Victoria, it was always important to show that the current Russian aggression is not new. It was not born on the 24th of February. It was not even born in 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea and started its invasion in eastern Ukraine, but rather a centuries-long fight for dignity and freedom for the Ukrainian people against a much pervading force. Another thing probably to note about the book is that it was written in English from the very start. Victoria had a marvelous command of the English language, and stylistically it's just delightful. But what she intended to do by using English is to address the audiences outside of Ukraine. So it is aimed to reach much, much wider readership than those who are already familiar with our fight, and probably open it up to new global international readers everywhere.
Thanks, Sasha. Now, talking about opening up the work to international readers everywhere, you've helped launch the Victoria Amelina Fellowship for Writers of Creative Non-Fiction. The deadline for applying for this is coming up. We'll put the link in the episode notes today for people to have a look at it. It looks like a really great fellowship and great opportunity for writers. Can you tell us a bit about it, please?
Well, it's another way for us to continue spreading the word about Victoria's work and also to honor her legacy. So it's a fellowship aimed at writers of creative nonfiction, both from Ukraine and from abroad. But currently, I'm appealing to our listeners from the abroad. We are seeking your applications, and we hope that you will be interested. So just in keeping with Victoria's international outlook, we want to try and build a bridge between Ukrainian and international literary communities. So at first, we will host a Ukrainian writer who will work with us on their individual project for 3 months in Lviv, which is Victoria's native city. This project needs to somehow address the problem of human rights and also to explore and document Russia's war against Ukraine. And then we will host an international writer, again, of creative nonfiction. And we treat this genre quite broadly. It can be a collection of documentary poetry that you intend to produce, or maybe a play, or maybe essays, or maybe reportage, and we will support you in the production of this work. So the international writer will also have an opportunity to work on this project for 3 months. They will be supported with a stipend and accommodation, and they will also gain access to a community which is interested in literature, which is interested in documentation. We will try to arrange events and media outreach and maybe field trips if the applicants would be interested in doing so. And I think it will be a pilot year for this fellowship. We will see how it works. We will see what kind of work it will help us produce. But basically what it aims at is justice in the very broad sense, justice pursued by Victoria in her work as a war crimes researcher, but also as a writer. This is justice that is not limited to a courtroom, but rather has an epistemic dimension. It helps to see the war and see Ukraine through our eyes, from our standpoint, and to invite international audiences to this point and invite them to see our struggle on our terms. And also never to allow the story of this war and our resistance to again be told by the colonizer or by various opportunists. So I think it's a worthy cause, and we will be very grateful for you spreading the word. I realize that the deadline is basically in 2 days, so please start working as soon as you can on your applications. We will be delighted to receive them.
That's great. And I'm sorry we've come to it late because we would have given it a bit more notice for folk to get their applications in. But there's still time. Still got two days. And it does sound fantastic. Accommodation in Lviv, a monthly stipend. Yeah, sounds great. I noticed that you are offering the opportunity to go to some liberated areas. So how dangerous do you think this fellowship would be or could be for people that wanted to take their research maybe a bit closer to the front line than some other areas of work?
Right. So we are organizing this fellowship, this project with our great partners, PEN Ukraine. It's a literary and human rights organization, which among its many activities runs regular volunteer trips to the so-called deoccupied areas, deoccupied regions of Ukraine, which could be in the Kharkiv region or in the north of Ukraine, or it could be frontline areas that are a little bit more exposed to Russian aggression than the western city of Lviv. I have taken part in these missions on many occasions, and I try to go as much as I can because these trips help me to reach communities in my country that otherwise remain quite isolated. And it helps me see my country in a way that otherwise would be impossible. Sometimes PEN Ukraine takes us to libraries where it always brings aid, books in English, among other languages, for local people to immerse themselves in culture and to always have this safe space where they can enjoy literature and power their imagination. When we go to these libraries in deoccupied areas, what happens is a Ukrainian and sometimes international cultural practitioners who join the trips, they read to local community members, they discuss some urgent questions with them. And this, again, helps to build these bridges not only between Ukrainian and international communities, but also between communities inside the country. And I find these trips incredibly fulfilling and incredibly inspiring, because every time you go to such places, you witness the courage of the Ukrainian people, which never fails to feel like a miracle. In terms of safety, so far, so good. What can I say? Ukraine is currently not the safest place in the world, and writers who would apply for this fellowship need to be cognizant of this. They would need to take responsibility for their own safety. We are at war, and Russian missiles fly everywhere. They reach as far as Lviv as well, and it is a risk which I will not underplay.
No, it's absolutely correct not to do so, if that's not mangling my England too badly. But I think it's a brilliant opportunity. So, folks, have a look at Index Ukraine. We'll put the link in the show notes, but Index Ukraine, and you'll find the Victoria Amelina Fellowship. Sasha, I'll come back to you in a moment, if I may, for any final thoughts. Then I've got some thoughts about the end of the year in a moment. But just my sort of final thoughts for today, just want to say thanks. Thanks to everyone for your lovely Christmas and New Year messages, plus your ongoing messages of love and support about David. Too many, literally too many to mention all of you, but we really do read every message. We appreciate your words, gifts, pictures. Johanna, your pictures of your home lost to the USSR in Karelia, I thought were very moving. Thank you for those. Thank you to Joe. Pictures from the church in Vilnius in Lithuania with what looks like a missile case being used to accept cash donations for Ukraine. And thank you to Christian and Anna Maria for the postcards and this pen. Is it a pelican? I've got it right here. The pen that I'm using here. It looks like a pelican. Or is it a toucan? What's the difference? You say potato, I say potato. You say jalapeno, I say jalapeno. Anyway. Pelican, toucan, not entirely sure, but thank you anyway. Thanks to everybody who's donated to Humanity and Inclusion, the charity we're supporting this year that David was very involved with. And thank you to Richard for the donation to the Canada-Ukraine Foundation, plus many, many others. I'm sorry if I can't mention everybody, but we really do appreciate it all. Right, I said I'll come back with a few thoughts. This will be, as I say, the last live episode of the year, so I'll just give it my collected thoughts from the mind of Marge about the year in a moment. But Sasha, would you like to have any last words for our listeners, please?
First, a great thank you for supporting Ukraine and for sticking with us for so long. We can't appreciate this enough. And secondly, I would like to draw your attention to the case of Cecilia Sala, who is a professional international journalist. She works in war zones. She covers wars. She is from Italy, and she's a fantastic, great friend of Ukraine who was imprisoned in Tehran on the 19th of December. And currently she's being kept in prison, and we are worried about her freedom, about her health. Has come to Ukraine on many an occasion. She visited the front line. I helped her report from my hometown, home city of Zaporizhia. She covered local cultural losses. She covered local history. And she was a fantastic and professional and warm journalist and person to work with. And I just implore our audiences and our listeners to spread the word and to keep all eyes on the case of Cecilia Sala, who is currently being kept as a prisoner in Iran.
Thanks, Sasha. Yes, and I know after we spoke this morning, I had a look into it, and I see that the Italian ambassador has had very limited access, and the family, Cecilia's family, still don't really know. Well, they've not said what the charges are or anything. So, of course, we'll keep an eye on that. Sasha, thank you so much. Well, folks, it's the end of another year of this war. What have we got to say? What have we got to reflect on it? This year, we have seen very strong evidence. And again, I'm playing nice for legal reasons, but very strong evidence Russia has been responsible for incendiary device attacks on planes in Europe, for causing massive ecological damage by operating Shadow Fleet tankers, for targeting water supplies in Finland, Germany, and Sweden, for an arson attack on a business in London linked to Ukraine, for targeting US military facilities in Germany, for the surge in GPS and AIS, that's the automatic identification system, jamming around the Baltic Sea, and more. We end 2024 with Iranian ballistic missiles landing in Europe, North Korean troops fighting in Europe, and dual-use technology and other Chinese technology being used to kill and maim in Europe. And again, I probably said something very similar last year. I haven't got my notes, but when will the world stop treating these things as individual acts of recklessness or incompetence or petulance or a byproduct of this war? At any other time, individually, these things would have caused a massive stir, but they just seem to be brushed off. Looking the other way or giving the benefit of the doubt are conscious acts. They are not passive occurrences in a busy week. I've said it before, my bugbear, amongst many others, the United Nations, especially the Secretary General. I had a look this morning. Mr. Guterres did make a statement on the Azeri plane crash. He said the Secretary General is deeply saddened by the news of a plane crash in western Kazakhstan, which has claimed the lives of many, including citizens of Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, the Kyrgyz Republic and the Russian Federation. He extends his heartfelt condolences to the families of the victims and expresses his profound sympathy to the affected nations. The Secretary-General also wishes a swift and full recovery to those injured in this tragic incident. That was it. He said, Mr. Guterres put out a statement, he said nearly 3 times as many words on December the 27th in a message about International Day of Epidemic Preparedness. And he said literally the same words about the heartfelt condolences to the families and the bit about wishes a swift and full recovery to those injured in this tragic event. Literally the same words in a statement yesterday about the plane crash in Korea. Look the statements up on the UN website. They are literally the same words, cut and paste. So I end the year as despondent as I started it regarding the UN Secretary General. Now, his ability to do anything to hold Russia to any kind of account, I accept, is limited. But it is apparent disinterest that I find so disgraceful. 3 years in, and there are still too many in the international community that are seen on too many issues and on too many occasions to be looking at their shoes, shrugging their shoulders. There is still this myth of Russian omnipotence. It persists against all evidence on the ground and in the air in Ukraine and Russia and on and under the Black Sea. There is still the belief that escalation management means backing down when Russia raises its tired old voice again, instead of a belief that escalation management is best served by making sure Russia, maybe behind closed doors and maybe through diplomatic back channels, but Russia was made to feel absolutely terrified of the capabilities ranged against it and the support that would be given to Ukraine. So the international community, you're on the naughty step as well. So the war as commonly understood, or the commonly understood bit, I accept that I know listeners to this podcast have a much more sophisticated and deep understanding of the war. But for shorthand, the war as commonly understood, let's look at it this year. The lines barely shifted in 2024. Russia and North Korea now are losing hundreds of people a day in pointless meat assaults. The Russian Air Force lobs glide bombs from 40 k's behind the lines because they know they're vulnerable to Ukrainian air defence. The vast majority of Russian drones and missiles are shot down. The Russian Black Sea Fleet is still absent. It is incorrect to say simply that Ukraine is losing. Neither side is winning or losing. Both are doing both in different ways at the same time. There's been no breakthrough. There's unlikely to be any breakthrough in the short term. But Ukraine, the energy infrastructure is doing okay. It's not great. It's doing okay. The money, doing okay. Manpower, that is an area of concern. Ongoing international support, that is an area of concern. But for Russia, the economy is weak and getting weaker. The Russian manpower situation is weak and getting weaker. So, it's a tricky point. It's a very tricky point as we look at whatever's going to happen with Donald Trump when he comes in on January the 20th, whatever might happen with negotiations and actual negotiations, not just the performative crap that Lavrov and Putin come out with, actual negotiations. There's going to be some tough times ahead, but I think it is simply incorrect to say Ukraine is losing right now. If you'd said nearly 3-4 years ago that they'd be in this position now, well, they wouldn't have accepted it, but I think they would be more pleasantly surprised than they were in the summer of 2022. So yeah, I'm a bit despondent, but I'm also positive. I'm a bit of a glass of vodka half full, as you may know. So yeah, I'm a bit of an optimist on this one. I think, as I said before, Ukraine just has to stay there. The international support has to stay there. Russia is weak and getting weaker by the day. So we will see what happens through the next few months. But folks, thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for your love and support over David. Thanks for keeping this most important of issues, if not number one in your day, because, hey, we're all busy. But thank you for keeping it on your daily radar. We're going to be back on Thursday live. There's pre-records tomorrow and January the 1st. We've got lots of plans for 2025, lots of techie stuff that I've been getting my hand in the mangle with. And I've got some more people you'll hear voices of. If my evil plans come to fruition, we'll hear much more of Venetia and others. But yeah, plans for 2025. I hope you'll come along with us. But thanks, Sasha. Thank you again for coming on today. Lovely to speak to you. Hope to see you again soon. And from the Telegraph in London, I wish you, as far as possible, a happy and peaceful New Year. Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from the Telegraph, created by David Nicholls. To support our work and to stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to the Telegraph. You can get your first 3 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Or sign up to Dispatches, our foreign affairs newsletter, bringing stories from our award-winning foreign correspondents straight to your inbox. We also have a Ukraine Live blog on our website, where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on Twitter Spaces. Follow the Telegraph so you don't miss it. To our listeners on YouTube, please note that due to issues beyond our control, there is sometimes a delay between broadcast and upload, so if you want to hear Ukraine the Latest as soon as it's released, do refer to podcast apps. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We do continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on Twitter. You can find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we are especially interested to hear where you are listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Rachel Porter. Executive producers are Louisa Wells and David Nicholls.